Truistory Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistory Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Wellington Ridge, Missouri, was the kind of town where time moved slower than anywhere else. Its streets curled like old ribbons between wheat fields and rusting silos, and the houses bore chipped paint like worn-out memories. Life here didn't change, it simply endured. And for Seraphina Blythe, every breath of that dusty, humid air was a reminder that she had once wanted more. At 27, Seraphina had already been married for 6 years to Callum Vance, a man whose silence was as steady as the hands he used to hammer roofs and lay bricks. He was kind in the way a river is kind, unmoving, predictable, and utterly unaware of the storm brewing beneath its surface. Their son, Asher, was 5, an inquisitive, bright-eyed boy who adored frogs, mud, and bedtime stories. Seraphina loved him more than her own skin, but motherhood hadn't filled the hollowness inside her chest. If anything, it had deepened it, widening the gap between what she had and what she once dreamed of. Each morning followed the same script. Callum would rise at 5:30 a.m. sharp, boots thudding on the hardwood floor as he made his way to the kitchen. Seraphina would already be there, apron tied, scrambling eggs, her eyes still laced with sleep. He'd say, "Mornin'," and she'd nod. That was all. No kiss on the cheek.
no lingering glances.
Their conversations had become transactional. "Can you grab milk on the way home? I left Asher's jacket in the truck. Did you pay the electric bill?" It wasn't that Callum didn't care, he just didn't know how to show it in ways that counted. Seraphina had tried, early in their marriage. Love notes in lunchboxes. Surprise dinners. Once, a picnic under the willow tree near the creek. But his reactions were always muted, grateful but distant, as if he were standing behind a wall she could never scale. By now, she had stopped trying. On a particularly hot Thursday afternoon, Seraphina was hanging laundry when she saw a cloud of dust kicking up the road. A black SUV rolled into the driveway. Too sleek, too polished for this town. Her heart skipped a beat. She already knew who it was. Her brother, Rowan Blythe, stepped out of the driver's side in jeans and a sleeveless shirt, his arms sun-bronzed and tattooed. He hadn't been back in almost a year. Behind him emerged a man Seraphina didn't recognize right away. Tall, sharp-suited despite the heat, sunglasses reflecting the sun like polished obsidian. Rowan smirked. "Don't just stand there like you saw ghosts, Sarah. Aren't you gonna hug your big brother?" Seraphina dropped the laundry basket and ran to him. They hugged tight, two orphans who had survived a childhood of silence and scraped knees, raised by an alcoholic uncle and too many regrets. Then she turned to the stranger, who was already pulling off his glasses. "This is my friend," Rowan said.
Dresden Kairos.
"From San Fran. We used to work rigs together before he made it big." Dresden extended a hand. "Pleasure, Seraphina. I've heard more about you than you'd believe." She shook his hand, and something shifted. A tension, a buzz beneath her skin.
His voice was velvet.
His smile, not too wide, not too fast, rested just on the edge of sincerity and mystery. He looked at her like she wasn't just someone's wife. Dinner that night was laughter-filled and loud, something the Blythe Vance home hadn't heard in years. Dresden talked about art, architecture, whiskey bars in Tokyo. He made Callum look like a farmer carved from stone, nodding politely but mostly silent, out of his element. Seraphina watched Dresden speak with his hands, his words like poetry. He was charming in a way Callum had never been, attentive, observant. He noticed when she reached for the salt. He asked about her garden. He complimented her iced tea. And when Callum excused himself to wash up, Dresden leaned in across the table and said, "You know, you look too young to already look so tired." Seraphina blinked. "I mean that in the nicest way," he added. You've got these beautiful eyes, sad but striking. Makes a man wonder what story they're holding. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Maybe ever. Later that night, long after the guests had gone to the guest room, and Callum had fallen asleep beside her without a word, as always, Seraphina lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. It ticked rhythmically like a heartbeat she didn't recognize. She felt exposed.
Scene.
A part of her she had locked away long ago was waking up, stretching, daring to feel again. And for the first time in years, she wondered, was there still something left of the girl who once dreamed of painting in Paris, who used to believe in fate? She thought about Dresden's eyes. The way he held her gaze longer than was polite. The way he made her laugh with just a half smile. It was dangerous. But it also felt like being alive. The next morning, Dresden was already on the porch sipping black coffee. Seraphina joined him, apron still on, fingers absently wiping flour onto the hem. "You always this early?" she asked. "Never," he said. "But the light here, it's different."
Honest.
Makes a man want to write poetry. Or steal something precious. She laughed, cheeks flushing. "Careful, Mr. Kairos. In this town, even charm is suspicious." He looked at her then, not her apron, not her hands, not the house behind her, but directly at her, like she was a story worth reading from the first page to the last. "I don't mind suspicion," he said softly. "I've been guilty of worse." The weekend passed like a slow song with an aching chord. Every interaction with Dresden became more charged. His hand brushed hers when she handed him a dish. His glance lingered as she bent to pick up Asher's toys. Once, when Rowan wasn't looking, Dresden whispered, "You know, in another life, I'd have written poems about your smile." Seraphina laughed, but her voice caught in her throat. In another life. She was starting to want that life. Callum, meanwhile, remained unchanged. He never noticed the glances, never questioned the sudden color in her cheeks or the distant look in her eyes. He was good, loyal, but blind to the quiet implosion happening right beside him. On Sunday evening, Dresden and Rowan packed up to leave. They hugged goodbye at the gate. Rowan was the first to step into the car, but Dresden lingered. "I meant what I said," he told Seraphina.
His voice low.
"You're not as invisible as this town makes you feel." She swallowed. "What do you want from me?" He smiled gently. "To wake you up." Then he handed her a business card, sleek, minimal, with a handwritten number on the back. "If you ever find the courage," he said, "call me." And with that, he was gone. That night, Seraphina stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, the card burning in her apron pocket. Behind her, Callum sipped his beer, watching football, not once turning to look at her. The ceiling fan ticked. The old refrigerator hummed. The silence screamed. And Seraphina, still wet with dishwater, realized that the peace she was living in had been hollow all along. The card stayed tucked inside Seraphina's apron drawer, beneath a worn-out potholder and a faded grocery list. She told herself she wouldn't touch it. But each time she opened that drawer to grab a spoon or a spatula, it called to her like a whisper behind wallpaper. Quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. She didn't call. Not at first. Instead, she Googled Dresden Kairos. The search revealed a series of curated articles and press clippings. Visionary behind Kairos Studio. The man reviving urban minimalism. California's dark horse of design. His Instagram was sleek, black and white images of cityscapes, architectural models, espresso shots, and cryptic captions. But what struck her most weren't the pictures. It was who she became while scrolling through them. Curious. Excited.
Alive.
2 weeks passed. Then 3. Callum never noticed her restlessness. Or maybe he did, and didn't know what to do with it. He'd leave for work before dawn, come home with dust in his hair and aches in his shoulders. She'd ask how his day went. He'd grunt, eat,
And watch TV.
Routine was comfort to him. To Seraphina, it had become a noose. So one quiet Tuesday, with Asher at preschool and the wind tapping like knuckles at the kitchen window, she pulled the card from the drawer, dialed the number, and held her breath. One ring.
2, 3.
Then, Kairos. His voice. Deep. Velvet. Familiar. Her words tripped. It's Seraphina. A pause. Well, damn, he said softly. I was starting to think that drawer swallowed me whole. She laughed. Nervous.
Alive.
I probably shouldn't have called, she said. Probably not, he agreed. But I'm glad you did. The calls became weekly, then daily. 10 minutes. Then 30. Then hours. Dresden never pressured her, never pushed. But he listened to her stories about motherhood, her sketches she never showed anyone, the way Callum did notice when she cut her hair. He said things like, "You weren't meant to fade, Seraphina. The way you see the world, it deserves a canvas, not a casserole dish. You feel things too deeply to be buried in that town forever." She didn't know when it started, but soon, she began sketching again. Her hands remembered the lines, the way light danced on paper. She drew Asher's eyes, the garden's dying tomatoes, the silhouette of Dresden's voice. It was Dresden who suggested they meet again. "I'll be in Kansas City next week for a client meeting."
2 hours from you, he said.
"Come have coffee. Just coffee. You deserve to talk to someone who sees you." The words wrapped around her like a secret scarf. She drove to Kansas City on a lie, told Callum she was taking Asher to a pediatric checkup in Springfield and meeting Rowan afterward. Callum nodded, without asking further. He trusted her. And that was the worst part. Dresden waited at a downtown cafe, wearing a charcoal coat. The kind of scent that made you forget how to spell your own name, and eyes that said, "I see every inch of you, and I want more." When she stepped inside, he stood, not out of politeness, but reverence. "You came," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. "I wasn't sure I would," she replied. "I was." They didn't talk much over coffee. Not about the past, the town, or Callum. Just books.
Films. Paris. Light.
And longing. And silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that feels like something sacred is happening beneath the noise. When he leaned forward and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, she didn't pull away. When he said, "I could fall in love with you if I'm not careful," she didn't say no. When he kissed her outside the cafe, beneath a maple tree shedding its golden regrets, she kissed him back and felt the world tilt under her feet. The next meeting wasn't for coffee. It was at a boutique hotel off the highway. Neutral ground. No questions. No guilt. Just passion. Pressed between four walls and a pair of hands that knew exactly how to unlock every part of her she had buried under motherhood and marriage. With Dresden, she wasn't Mrs. Vance or Asher's mom. She was Seraphina.
Whole. Wanting.
Wanted. They met 3 more times over the next month. Hotels, quiet towns, one overnight girls' retreat, lie that made her nauseous when Callum packed her snacks. But guilt has a way of bleeding into even the softest sheets. One night, after Dresden had fallen asleep beside her, Seraphina sat by the window, robe pulled tight, eyes searching the skyline. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't heartless. But she was changing. She had built a life around silence and routine, but now she'd tasted color. Music.
Fire.
Could she go back? Did she even want to? Things at home became brittle. Callum noticed her distance, but mistook it for fatigue. "You feelin' all right?" he asked one night as she barely touched her dinner. "Just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." "It's nothing," she whispered. But it was everything. Then came the offer. They were lying in a king-size bed in Tulsa, city lights splashing across their bodies like ink. "I've been thinking," Dresden said. Seraphina, eyes closed, replied, "That's dangerous." He smiled against her shoulder. "Come with me. Leave that town. Leave that man. I'll take care of everything." She sat up, heart in her throat. "You're serious?"
"As a storm," he said.
"We'll disappear. Change your name if we have to. I'll buy you a house near the coast. We'll open a gallery. You can paint.
Breathe.
Be who you were always meant to be." Her heart screamed yes. Her brain whispered run. But Asher, she said. He can come later. When you're stable. When the dust settles. Right now, you need to survive. Then we'll build. It was wrong. It was selfish. It was exactly what she'd been waiting to hear. That night, she didn't sleep. But she decided. She'd do it. Over the next week, she planned everything. She sold her piece of inherited land quietly, lying to Callum that it was too difficult to maintain. She packed slowly, hiding clothes in her sister-in-law's attic. She forged a story, visiting her cousin in Georgia for a mental reset. Callum bought it. Of course he did. On the day of departure, she made pancakes for Asher, kissed his forehead twice, whispered, "I love you more than the stars." Then she turned and left.
She didn't look back.
Not once. Sanctuary Bay, California, was Dresden's world. The air smelled of ocean and espresso. The apartment he brought her to was sleek, glass walls, modern furniture, and framed prints of abstract sorrow. He bought her silk robes, gold necklaces, high-end sketchbooks. "You're not small anymore," he told her, "so stop acting like it." At first, it felt like a dream. She woke up next to a man who kissed her shoulder before saying good morning. She had her own closet, her own coffee mug. She painted until her fingers cramped. She listened to jazz while cooking pasta barefoot. She became someone new. But paradise has shadows. Dresden began disappearing at odd hours, client meetings, gallery visits, emergencies. He'd come home smelling faintly of gin and something Seraphina couldn't place, something expensive and floral. He stopped complimenting her drawings. He stopped asking how she slept. He started locking his phone. One night, she found a long, golden hair on the back of his jacket. She was brunette. When she asked about it, he smiled too easily. "Paranoia doesn't suit you, Sarah. But you're hiding something." "Am I?" he said coolly. "Or are you just projecting your own guilt?" And just like that, she was back to being the problem. It took another week before she found the texts. "I miss you, Dee." She's pathetic. She thinks you actually care. "Call me after she sleeps." The number wasn't saved, but the messages were unmistakable. So was the photo Dresden had sent, standing shirtless at the edge of the bed Seraphina now sat on. She froze.
Her ears rang.
Her chest tightened. She hadn't run from a hollow life. She had run into a cage made of gold. The next morning, Seraphina didn't ask about the messages. She couldn't. Instead, she made coffee like usual, placed 2 mugs on the marble counter, and tried not to look at Dresden's phone sitting beside them. Face down, locked, unreadable. He walked out of the bedroom buttoning his shirt, whistling some jazz riff she used to love, but now found irritating. He kissed the top of her head. She flinched. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. That night, while Dresden was out, reviewing floor plans, Seraphina sat alone in the sleek apartment and reread the messages she had screenshotted and sent to her old email account. The woman texting him. She hadn't signed her name, but the tone was venomous, mocking, possessive. The more she read, the more the puzzle pieces started clicking into place. The timelines, the phone calls, the strange silences, the gold strand of hair. She wasn't the only one. Worse, she might have never been the one. The next day, she followed him. He took an Uber to a high-rise complex near the marina. She kept her distance, watched from across the street as Dresden entered the building. 30 minutes later, a tall woman in a rust-colored trench coat exited the same lobby. Her blonde hair caught the wind. She looked rich, angry,
Familiar.
Seraphina's stomach dropped. She knew that face. Marceline.
Her sister-in-law.
Her brother Rowan's wife. It didn't make sense.
Except it did.
Seraphina staggered backward, hiding behind a lamppost as Marceline called a driver. She looked at her phone.
Laughed.
Walked away. Seraphina stood frozen in the shade, the realization detonating behind her eyes like a firebomb. This had all been a setup. The whispers Dresden fed her. The timing of their reunion. The seduction. The escape. It hadn't been fate. It had been revenge. That night, She confronted him. She didn't scream, didn't throw anything. She just held up her phone and said, "How long have you and Marceline been planning this?" Dresden's body stiffened. His eyes didn't flinch. "Long enough," he said coolly. "Long enough to know your family ruins everything it touches. You used me." "No," he corrected, walking slowly toward her. "I offered you something you desperately wanted. I just didn't lie about the cost. You made me leave my son, my marriage, my life." He cut her off. "Don't you dare romanticize that life. You were drowning in it. You begged me to pull you out. I thought you loved me." He laughed, dry and dangerous. "You thought wrong." Then his smile twisted into something cruel. "You think I'm the monster? Your brother took everything from me, contracts, investors, years of my work. He let me rot. You think I'd forget that? Forgive that?
No, Seraphina.
I don't forgive. I build empires from ashes, and you." He pointed at her, eyes dark as tar. "You are just the spark." She slapped him. The sound cracked through the apartment. He didn't flinch. He just stepped back, adjusted his collar, and said, "You're welcome to leave. But you walk out that door. You walk out with nothing. I don't want anything from you."
Dresden smirked.
"That's good. Because you have nothing." She reached for her purse, only to realize her keys and wallet were gone. He lifted his phone and showed her a photo. The screenshots she had taken. Deleted. "You really should log out of your email when you're using my Wi-Fi." Her throat closed. "You can't do this." "I already have." She tried the front door. It was locked from the outside. Not with a chain. With a keypad. That night was the first time Dresden raised his voice. The second night was the first time he shoved her. By the end of the week, he had moved her to a different apartment, smaller, less furnished, hidden behind a construction site he claimed to be developing. There was no natural light.
No neighbors.
No locks on her side of the door. Just a mattress. A mini fridge. And Dresden's voice through the intercom. "Behave, and this won't get worse." Seraphina cried the first night. Screamed the second. By the third, she realized no one was coming. He brought food once a day, always cold. Always tasteless. Sometimes he sat with her. Sometimes he touched her. Not gently. Never lovingly. The days blurred. She lost count after 12. Her hands became shaky. Her sketches, frantic. She'd draw her son's face over and over until it bled through the paper. Then rip it up. Sobbing into the scraps. She missed the sound of frogs. She missed Asher's bedtime stories. She missed herself. One night, Dresden came in smelling of whiskey. He stumbled. Slurred. Spat insults she no longer responded to. He collapsed onto the mattress beside her and passed out cold. And that's when she saw it, his wallet poking out of his coat pocket. The zipper pouch half open. Inside, his spare keycard. She waited, barely breathing. Counted to 300, then reached in and pulled it out, slipping it into her sock. She didn't sleep that night. Just waited for daylight. When the sun peeked in through the construction tarp outside, she slid the card through the keypad. It turned green. The door clicked open. She ran. Barefoot. Breathless. No phone. No plan. Just instinct. She flagged a trucker at a gas station 2 miles down, offered her necklace in exchange for a ride north. The man, kind-eyed and curious, said nothing. Drove her to the nearest Greyhound station and handed her $20. "You got someone waiting for you?" he asked. She shook her head. "I have to become someone again first." She bought the cheapest ticket to Missouri. It didn't matter where, as long as it was far from Sanctuary Bay, far from Dresden Keros. The ride home was long, cold, haunted, but it was hers. When she stepped off the bus in Wellington Ridge, it was still dark. The stars blinked quietly above, like they'd been holding their breath for her return. She walked 2 miles to her old house.
The porch light was on.
And there, asleep on a lawn chair, was Callum Vance. Still in his work boots. Still in that faded flannel she used to steal when she was cold. Beside him, A small pair of shoes. Asher's. She didn't ring the bell. She didn't knock. She just sat on the front step and cried. And when the sun rose, Callum stirred, rubbed his eyes, and saw her. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stared, then stood, then said, "You look like hell." Seraphina laughed through her tears. "I feel worse." He walked down the steps, stopped in front of her, said, "I made coffee," and left the door open. She followed. The first thing Seraphina noticed was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The hollow kind. The kind that settled into walls like rot, silent, patient, irreversible. Callum said nothing as she stepped inside their old home. It smelled the same, cedarwood and worn denim, with a trace of cornbread lingering in the air. A few toys were scattered on the rug. Asher's boots by the back door. Her sketch of their wedding day still framed on the mantel. Only now, it was turned backward. She stood in the doorway like a ghost. Callum poured 2 cups of coffee.
No sugar. No cream.
Just black and scalding, the way he drank it when something weighed heavy. He set one down in front of her and took a seat across the table. The silence between them stretched wide, a canyon carved by betrayal and time. After what felt like years, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry." Callum didn't lift his eyes. "That's a hell of a word, Seraphina." She swallowed. "I know." Over the next few days, she slept in the guest room, formerly a storage closet with a cot and a view of the back fence. Callum didn't stop her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice. But he didn't smile either. Not once. Asher, meanwhile, hovered in the doorway each night, clutching a toy truck like a lifeline. "Are you staying, Mama?" he'd ask. She'd nod. "Yes, baby." And each time, he'd say, "Promise?" Her voice cracked. Promise. But promises, she knew, meant less than they once did. The town noticed. Of course it did. In Wellington Ridge, nothing stays buried, not heartbreak, not scandal, not sin. Her name floated through grocery aisles and coffee shops. The pastor's wife skipped her in the communion line. Her old art teacher avoided eye contact at the farmer's market. Even her cousin Becca, once her closest confidant, now replied to her wave with a tight-lipped smile and a turned back. There was no welcome party. No redemption arc. Only judgment wrapped in Sunday bests. The worst, however, came from her family. Her father wouldn't speak to her. Her brother Rowan refused to let her near his kids. "You humiliated us," he growled over the phone. "You tore this family apart. And you don't even realize what you left behind." Seraphina didn't argue, because he wasn't wrong. One evening, as she folded laundry in the dim light of her guest room, she paused over a small t-shirt, blue, with faded dinosaurs. Asher's. She brought it to her face and inhaled. That scent.
Familiar. Pure.
Safe. Suddenly, her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, clutching the shirt, sobbing until her ribs ached. Everything she had chased had turned to ash in her hands. She had been foolish, desperate, and now alone, even while surrounded by the remnants of what used to be home. A week later, she sat across from Callum again. Another quiet dinner. Another meal filled with food but void of warmth. "I want to tell you everything," she said. He didn't look up. "Why now?" "Because you deserve the truth." "I deserved it then." Her voice trembled. "I know." So she told him. All of it. The affair. The lies. The money. The apartment. The emotional abuse. The cage. The escape. She told him about Marceline. About Dresden's revenge. She told him about the cold floors, the bruises, the meals that came without kindness. And then she said, "I'm pregnant." The room went still. Callum's fork clinked against his plate, a metallic echo that rang like a gunshot. "Whose?" he asked. She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. That night, he didn't sleep at home. When he returned the next morning, he didn't speak. Just handed her a folded blanket and said, "You should see a doctor. Make sure everything's okay." "I'm keeping the baby," she whispered. I figured, he replied, voice flat, and walked away. The next week brought doctors, ultrasounds, and questions Seraphina wasn't ready to answer. The baby was healthy. 12 weeks along. A flutter on a black and white screen. Proof of a night she both regretted and clung to. She tried to find peace in small things. Watering Callum's overgrown plants. Drawing again, mostly in secret, mostly at night. Reading to Asher as he drifted to sleep, his tiny body curled against her like nothing had changed. But everything had. One night, Callum came home smelling of beer and saw her folding baby clothes she had bought with leftover cash. Onesies. Tiny socks. He stared at them like they were foreign objects. Then he said, I can't do this. Do what? Raise someone else's child. Seraphina's lips parted. Callum. No, he snapped. I'll help. I'll make sure you're safe. But don't expect me to forget. I'm not asking you to. He rubbed his face. You're asking me to forgive the unforgivable. She looked at him, really looked. The lines on his forehead. The tired blue in his eyes. The scar on his thumb from the time he fell off the roof, fixing the satellite dish. And for the first time in years, she realized how much he had endured. Not just in her absence, but long before it. I'm sorry, she said again, voice breaking. But this time, it meant something more. The days turned colder. Leaves fell. Pumpkins lined porches. And Seraphina grew rounder. Then came the letter. Postmarked from San Diego. No return address. Just a card inside. You ran. But the past has long legs. Her hands shook. Her breath hitched. He had found her. She didn't tell Callum. Not yet. She started locking her window. Started double-checking doors. Started walking faster when outside. She didn't go to the grocery store alone anymore. She stopped answering unknown numbers. She stopped sketching. She was terrified. Because she knew Dresden. And Dresden never let go. One night, she sat on the porch, watching the stars. Callum came out, sat beside her without a word. They sat in silence, the air heavy with unspoken memories. Then he said, Do you think he'll come here? She didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded. I'll be ready, he said. And she cried. Not because she was afraid, but because he still cared. Even after everything. In January, she gave birth to a baby boy. 10 fingers. 10 toes. Dark hair. Quiet eyes. She named him Eli. Callum held the baby, without being asked. Rocked him while Asher looked on curiously. No one spoke of the father. Not in that room. Not ever. Weeks passed. Winter melted into a hesitant spring. And slowly, so slowly, Seraphina started breathing again. She took Asher to the park. She planted new seeds in the yard. She started painting again, soft strokes of sunrise, forgiveness, and beginnings. One evening, she returned home to find a package on the doorstep. Inside, a single feather, a matchbox, and a photo of her holding Eli. On the back, scribbled in red ink. You owe me more than an apology. Her knees buckled. She dropped the photo. She screamed. But Callum was there before she hit the ground. He scooped up the photo, saw the back. Eyes went cold. He handed it to the sheriff the next morning. And for the first time, Seraphina felt less alone. She may never be whole again. But she wasn't broken beyond repair. She had made it out of the cage. She had scorched everything in her path. But from the ashes, she was starting to bloom again. The night after the photo arrived, Seraphina didn't sleep. She sat in the nursery, the hum of the old baby monitor echoing softly in the background. Eli's tiny breaths rose and fell like waves against the shore. The photo still lay on the kitchen table. A feather, a matchbox, a threat without volume but deafening in weight. Dresden wasn't done with her. But this time, she was done with him. The sheriff came by the next day. A thick-set man with a mustache and a kind heart. Sheriff Bickham listened as Callum explained everything, without a hint of judgment, only growing concern. Seraphina sat across from them, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to visibly tremble. We'll keep an eye out, the sheriff said. This guy sounds like he's got money and time. Bad combo. But if he crosses state lines to harass you, that's a federal matter. I can connect you with someone from the bureau. Seraphina nodded slowly. I want a restraining order. Good, the sheriff replied. We'll make it official. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice softening. You're not the first woman in this town to come back from hell, Seraphina. But you might be the first to walk straight through it and still have your soul intact. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So she did both. The order was filed that same week. Dresden Karos was legally barred from approaching her, her children, or her property. Still, the fear didn't leave. It lingered in the corners, in the sound of a car slowing outside, in a blocked number calling at 3 a.m., in the scent of cologne that wafted once through the grocery store aisle and nearly sent her to the floor. But fear no longer ruled her. She had decided. She would not run anymore. The next phase came slowly rebuilding, reclaiming. She enrolled in evening classes at a community center just outside of town, graphic design, and digital illustration. A teacher named Mr. Lowell took interest in her work immediately. You have emotion in your lines, he said. Real designers spend years trying to fake what you already know instinctively. She smiled. For the first time in years, the compliment didn't feel like bait. Callum kept his distance.
But he didn't disappear.
He'd fix the truck, fix dinner, fix the fence. And each time he did, there was a wordless peace between them, like two old trees that had grown apart but still shared the same soil. They no longer touched, but they no longer screamed either. Asher, on the other hand, flourished. He became protective of his baby brother, always standing near the crib, singing lullabies and half-tunes. He'd help Seraphina with diapers and bottles and even started calling her my mama, who came home. It melted her every time, because for all her sins, her son still believed she could be good. In March, she received an email. Subject line: Final warning. No sender listed. Inside, one line: You don't get to erase me. She read it, then deleted it, then printed a copy and gave it to Sheriff Bickham. Let him come, she said. I'm not afraid. And she meant it. Spring turned the town green again. And Seraphina, too, began to bloom in ways no one had expected. She launched a small business from home. Custom illustrations, commissioned portraits, even freelance logo work for nearby bakeries and boutiques. Orders trickled in slowly, then steadily. Her inbox filled with messages like, I want what you painted for the Andersons. Can you do something with cherry blossoms? My daughter just turned 5. I want her smile captured the way you see it. Seraphina had a style, a voice, a name again. She began dressing in color, playing music while she worked, leaving the porch light on, not in hope, but in defiance. Then, one quiet Sunday, as she laid Eli down for a nap, there was a knock at the door. Not the kind of knock that demanded attention, but the kind that felt hesitant, cautious. She opened it to find Marceline standing there, older, paler, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Seraphina blinked, stunned. Can I talk to you? Marceline asked. Seraphina didn't move. You shouldn't be here. I know. Please. Seraphina hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat in the kitchen.
No coffee. No plaisanteries.
Just ghosts between them. Marceline removed her sunglasses. A dark bruise bloomed beneath one eye. I left him, she whispered. Seraphina stared. Dresden. Marceline nodded. He wasn't done with me either. The story came out slowly. How Dresden turned violent after Seraphina escaped. How he blamed Marceline for letting her go. How he manipulated, gaslit, isolated her in a mirror image of what he'd done before. How did you find me? Seraphina asked. I didn't, Marceline replied.
He did.
He's coming. Those 2 words were enough to make Seraphina's blood run cold. But this time, she didn't crumble. She called the sheriff. Gave them everything. The email. The threat. The warning from Marceline. She filed an emergency protection request. She installed cameras. She bought pepper spray and a security alarm. But most importantly, she didn't hide. She told Callum.
She told her family.
She told her community. The woman who once fled in shame had now returned as someone fearless. And Wellington Ridge, begrudgingly, gradually, began to open its doors again. Not with applause, but with quiet solidarity. The showdown never came in gunfire. Instead, it arrived in paperwork. Sheriff Bickham worked with interstate authorities. Dresden's threats, combined with Marceline's sworn statement and prior evidence, were enough to trigger an investigation. An arrest warrant followed. He was taken into custody at a gala in Seattle. Arrogant to the end, smiling for photographers as they cuffed his wrists. But Seraphina didn't smile when she heard the news. She just exhaled, like she hadn't done in years. 2 months later, the sky above Wellington Ridge burned with summer light. The town held a small art festival on the green. And there, tucked between booths of pottery and wildflower honey, sat a table with a modest wooden sign. By Sarah Vance, Art from Healing. Her pieces weren't flashy, but they were real. Portraits of mothers holding babies. Fathers reading books to sleeping toddlers. A woman staring out a window, unsure whether she missed the world or herself.
People bought them.
People smiled. People saw her. That night, Callum came home with paint on his hands. He'd been working on the shed, restoring it into a studio space for her. Asher and Eli slept inside. Seraphina stood on the porch, arms folded, watching the fireflies. Callum joined her.
They didn't speak for a while.
Then he asked, "Do you still love him?" She shook her head. "I never really did." "And me?" She turned to him, voice soft. "You were the only one who ever saw me, even when I didn't." He swallowed. "Then maybe we can try again." She didn't say yes, but she reached for his hand. And this time she didn't let go. It started with a garden. Not a symbolic one. A real one. Dirt under your fingernails, back-breaking, sweat-dripping work. The kind of labor that doesn't ask who you've been, only who you're willing to become. Seraphina began it in late spring, behind the shed that Callum had converted into her art studio. The space had once been choked with weeds and rusted tools. Now it gleamed with fresh cedar panels, open windows, and the faint scent of lavender and acrylics. But she needed more than canvas. She needed grounding. So she planted. Eli sat in his bassinet nearby, shaded by an umbrella. Asher helped dig tiny holes, placing seeds into the earth like they were secrets. Seraphina whispered the names aloud as they dropped them in. Zinnias, sunflowers, marigolds, and this one, wildflowers. For the things we can't predict. What do wildflowers do? Asher asked. They grow where they're not supposed to, she replied, brushing his hair back. Even through cracks in stone. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. By July, petals had begun to emerge. So had forgiveness. But it came slower, rougher. From people she'd once called family. Her father showed up on a humid afternoon, arms crossed and jaw set. She was pulling weeds when she saw him standing by the mailbox, like a statue caught between leaving and staying. He didn't walk up.
She didn't wave.
But she wiped her hands on her jeans, stood, and approached. "Hey," she said, voice steady. His eyes, once so familiar, flicked to the garden. "You remember your grandma's garden back in Southport?" Seraphina blinked. "The one with the scarecrow?" He nodded. She used to say a woman's worth was measured by what she could grow from nothing. Silence. Then, quietly, he added, "Looks like you're starting to measure up." She didn't cry, but her shoulders sagged, like a knot had finally loosened after years. He didn't stay long, but he came again the next week, and this time, brought fertilizer. The whispers around town softened, too. At the grocery store, old Mrs. Kinney nodded as Seraphina passed by. At church, the pastor gave her a hesitant smile. Becca, her cousin who once wouldn't return her texts, stopped by the art festival with her toddler and bought a watercolor painting titled Forgiveness in blue. It didn't mean they forgot.
but it meant they were trying. And that was enough.
Her relationship with Callum stayed fragile but real. They didn't label it. There were still nights she slept in the guest room. Still mornings he drank coffee alone. But then came quiet moments, his hand brushing against hers as they reached for the same dish. A shared laugh over Eli's drool-covered giggle. A glance held too long over dinner. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was respect reborn. A gentle rebuilding of what had been burned. Marceline, meanwhile, had vanished again. After helping bring Dresden to justice, she had left town without warning. Sheriff Thickham said she was enrolled in a witness support program, relocating somewhere up north. She had mailed Seraphina one thing before disappearing, a single press lily in a small envelope with a card that read, "I'm sorry, too." By late summer, the garden exploded in color. Asher brought his teacher a bouquet of wildflowers on the first day of school. Eli took his first steps on the soft grass between the marigolds. Seraphina painted a new series, floral silhouettes of women in motion, titled Things That Still Bloom. People loved them. But more importantly, she loved them. For the first time in her adult life. She wasn't painting to be seen. She was painting to breathe. One evening, while cleaning her studio, she found the sketch she had drawn in her darkest hour. It was a pencil outline of a bird in a cage, with the door open, but the bird refusing to fly. She stared at it for a long time, then took a brush and painted flames licking the bottom of the cage. Then wildflowers bursting from the top. And in the center, the bird mid-flight. That piece sold at an auction in Austin. But before it left her studio, she traced one phrase in soft gold across the bottom. You don't have to be forgiven to be free. In October, she hosted a community workshop for women in recovery, survivors of abuse, and single mothers rebuilding their lives. Sponsored by a local church, it offered free painting supplies, shared stories, and hot cider. One woman, nervous and shaking, had painted nothing but jagged lines in black and blue. Seraphina knelt beside her. You know what those look like? She asked. The woman shook her head. Roots, Seraphina whispered. Even messy ones still hold you up. The woman cried. And Seraphina did too. The world hadn't forgotten who she'd once been. But she was becoming someone else now. Someone better. Not perfect, but rooted. On the one-year anniversary of her return, Callum surprised her with a picnic. They drove to the lake where they had first kissed, years before the heartbreak. Eli babbled on the blanket. Asher chased dragonflies. And Callum looked at her with something between admiration and ache. You're stronger now, he said. So are you, she replied. He smiled. Think there's still a road ahead for us? She reached across and took his hand. There is. But I'm not walking behind you anymore. He nodded. Side by side. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But love doesn't always return in a firestorm. Sometimes it sneaks in like morning light, warm, slow, and honest. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Seraphina stood and walked to the edge of the water. She pulled something from her bag, a worn photograph, the one Dresden had mailed her. A ghost of a threat. She let it fall into the lake, watched it dissolve. And in her chest, something heavy lifted, like ash rising into wind. She turned back. And behind her, wildflowers bloomed. Autumn left the world golden. The leaves fell in slow spirals. The air thinned with chill and clarity. Everything felt quieter, more honest. So did Seraphina. She no longer checked the locks obsessively. She no longer startled at the sound of mail sliding through the slot. She no longer clutched her phone like a lifeline. That part of her was done. It didn't mean she forgot what had happened. It just meant she could breathe again without tasting blood. One Sunday morning, Asher crawled into her bed, hair wild, cheeks warm. Can I ask something, Mama? She brushed his curls aside. Always. Why did you go away? Her heart paused, then restarted.
Carefully.
She sat up, pulled him into her lap, and wrapped her arms around his small body. Because I got really lost, baby. But you came back. I did. Promise you won't leave again? She kissed his forehead. I promise. Even if I get lost again, I'll always find my way back to you. Eli began to talk soon after. Simple words. Mama, ball, no, more. But his favorite was light. He'd point to the ceiling or the sky, or a reflection on the wall, and say it with joy, light. And Seraphina would always repeat it back to him, like a prayer. Because that was the word she wanted him to carry through life. Not dark. Not hurt. Not fear. Light. Her art evolved, too. She began painting on glass. Transparent canvases, layered, fragile, and alive with color. Each one shimmered in the sun. Galleries started calling. A small online feature ran with the title, The Woman Who Paints Pain into Bloom. But she declined interviews. Her work spoke loud enough. In mid-November, Callum took her and the boys to a cabin for the weekend. A quiet, lakeside place they used to visit before things went wrong. Now, it felt like healing ground. That first night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Callum built a fire. They sat side by side on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. Above them, stars blinked like silent promises. Do you think we'll ever be us again? He asked. She didn't rush her answer. I think we're a new kind of us now. And are you happy with that kind? She smiled gently. I'm learning to be. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. And in that silence, surrounded by pine trees and soft wind, they didn't need to say the words. They were finally safe in the same story. On Thanksgiving, her brother Rowan showed up unexpectedly. She was setting the table. Asher was drawing turkeys on construction paper. Eli had a spoon in each hand, drumming against his tray. Rowan didn't bring food. He brought a hug. No words. Just arms. Tight. Forgiving. I was wrong, he said quietly. So was I. And that was it. The cold between them melted in an instant. The last loose end unraveled in December. The trial came and went. Dresden pled out, sentenced to 5 years on multiple charges, including coercion, harassment, and fraud. Seraphina didn't attend the hearing. She didn't want to see him, didn't want him to see her. But she got a letter. Not from him. From Marceline. He's gone for now. But even when he's out, I doubt he'll ever be brave enough to face someone who rose from the ashes he made. He's a man who builds cages because he's too small for open space. Seraphina folded the letter and slid it into the back of her sketchbook. She never responded. Some chapters are better left without an epilogue. On Christmas Eve, Callum gave her a small wrapped box. Inside was a necklace, a glass pendant. Not expensive. But inside it, suspended in clear resin, was a single dried wildflower from her garden. She pressed it to her chest, unable to speak. Callum whispered, You grew something beautiful and you let me stand beside it. They kissed. Soft. Unrushed. Earned. New Year's Eve came, with quiet celebration. Seraphina didn't make resolutions. She didn't need them. She had a home again. A family that felt like light. She was no longer the woman who ran. She was the one who stayed. On January 3rd, she launched a community program for women starting over. Free art therapy, skills training, and a space for stories. She named it The Wildflower Place. Because sometimes the most broken people grow the boldest things. One afternoon in early spring, Asher tugged at her sleeve while she painted. Hey, Mama. When I grow up, I want to be kind like you. She froze, then set her brush down, pulled him close, and whispered, You already are. Outside, the garden bloomed again. 1,000 colors. No calles. Only open sky. And Seraphina, barefoot in the dirt, baby in her arms, paint under her fingernails, looked up and smiled. Because this time, she knew she was home. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.